There is a dream you have had before, the same corridor, the same feeling of something following just behind you. And even now, lying here in the dark, some part of you already knows that dream has never truly been random. Tonight, we are going to step inside that feeling together. And by the time this journey ends, you may find that your most unsettling nights have been trying to tell you something gentle all along. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Wherever you are right now, perhaps in the quiet of a room that holds you safely while the rest of the world sleeps, let yourself settle. Your body knows this posture. It has been here 10,000 times before. We will move through 100 psychology facts about the science of recurring nightmares. From the first flickering of a dream in the deepest chambers of your brain, to the ancient circuits that keep repeating the same story, to the quiet moment when those stories finally begin to change. This thoughtful journey into the sleeping mind builds a soft community of curious, tired people looking for rest instead of fear. A gentle like, subscribe, or quiet share helps another restless soul find their way here and brings us closer to protecting this space for every mind that needs it. Your presence tonight matters to us, one sleepy soul at a time. Let yourself settle completely here. Notice the weight of your body where it touches the bed, the pillow, the softness of where you rest. You don't need to hold on to anything we explore tonight. Let every thought arrive like a visitor passing through a room, acknowledged, unhurried, and allowed to move on. There is a quiet heaviness beginning at the edges of your awareness now, like consciousness dimming its own lights. Slowly, without effort. Simply let it come. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You are resting in the space between one dream and the next, where the mind is neither asleep nor fully awake. Let your awareness dissolve into that in-between softness. And now we begin. Recurring nightmares are not accidents. They are one of the most studied and well-documented phenomena in sleep science, and research consistently shows they are meaningful events produced by a specific, identifiable system inside your brain. A nightmare is defined scientifically as a vivid, disturbing dream that causes sufficient emotional distress to wake the sleeper. And when that dream returns again and again with similar themes or imagery, it becomes what researchers call a recurring nightmare. The fact that it keeps coming back is itself a signal. Your sleeping brain does not repeat without reason. Something is being worked on. Something is being held. Tonight, we begin with what that something is. Research suggests that the large majority of adults experience at least one nightmare in a given year, with some population estimates placing that figure above 80%. But the people who experience them frequently, meaning once a week or more, make up somewhere between 2 and 5% of the general population. That may sound small, but it represents tens of millions of people worldwide who wake night after night from the same dark corridors, the same pursuing shadows, the same sense of something unresolved. You are not alone in this experience. It has existed as long as human beings have slept and dreamed. Recurring nightmares are most common during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the stage of sleep when your brain is most electrically active and most resembles waking activity. REM sleep typically begins about 90 minutes after you fall asleep and returns in longer cycles throughout the night. During REM, the muscles of your body are gently paralyzed, a feature called REM atonia, while your mind runs extraordinarily vivid simulations Most of the dreams you remember in the morning originated here, and most nightmares find their home in this electrically alive, emotionally charged landscape. The amygdala is the emotional core of the nightmare. This small, almond-shaped structure deep inside your brain is responsible for processing fear, threat detection, and emotional memory. Brain imaging studies consistently show that the amygdala is highly active during nightmares, sometimes significantly more active than during ordinary dreams. It does not simply observe the fear in the dream. It generates it, deepens it, and quietly signals to the rest of the brain that something is still unresolved. When a nightmare keeps returning, the amygdala is often part of why, patiently, persistently, raising its hand. Directly connected to the amygdala's influence is a region called the prefrontal cortex, the area of your brain most associated with rational thinking, emotional regulation, and the ability to say to yourself, "This is just a dream," during REM sleep, and especially during nightmares. The prefrontal cortex becomes significantly less active. Research using large-scale fMRI imaging published in 2024 confirmed a measurable reduction in the functional connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex in people who experience frequent nightmares. In other words, the part of the brain that could calm the fear is temporarily quieted, leaving the emotional alarm ringing without a hand to soothe it. The hippocampus also plays a quiet but central role. Nestled beside the amygdala, the hippocampus is your brain's memory archivist, converting experiences into long-term storage and helping recreate past scenes in both waking recall and sleep. During nightmares, the hippocampus is unusually active, often replaying memory fragments with heightened emotional coloring. Research suggests a positive correlation between hippocampal activity and nightmare recall, meaning the more actively the hippocampus is engaged during a disturbing dream, the more likely you are to wake with vivid memory of what just happened. The nightmare is not invented wholesale. It is assembled from your own archive. Recurring nightmares are not a modern problem. Ancient Mesopotamian texts from over 3,000 years ago describe dreams that returned night after night, filled with threatening figures and suffocating darkness. The Sumerians had a word for the demon believed to cause repeated nightmares, a visitation from the boundary between the living and the dead. Ancient Greek physicians classified nightmares as a medical condition requiring treatment. The Egyptians carved protective spells onto bedroom walls to ward off bad dreams. Across every human culture that kept written records, the recurring nightmare has been named, feared, and sought to be understood. We are continuing a conversation that is thousands of years old. What makes a nightmare recurring, rather than simply bad, is a feature researchers describe as thematic persistence. The specific imagery may shift. The location might change from a familiar hallway to an open field. But the emotional core remains consistent. You are being chased. You are trapped. Something important has been lost. Someone you love is in danger, and you cannot help. These themes appear across cultures, across age groups, and across generations with remarkable consistency. Researchers studying dream content across dozens of countries have found that the top recurring nightmare themes, being pursued, falling, being unable to move, emerge so reliably that they suggest a universal architecture in the way human fear is organized during sleep. The brain does not sleep uniformly. throughout the night. Your sleep cycles through stages: lighter NREM sleep, then deeper slow-wave sleep, then the electrically vivid landscape of REM. Each full cycle takes approximately 90 to 120 minutes. A typical adult completing a full night of sleep moves through 4 to 5 complete cycles. What is fascinating is that the proportion of time spent in REM sleep grows with each successive cycle. The first REM period may last only a few minutes. The last one before waking can extend to an hour or more. This means that the most emotionally intense, nightmare-prone sleep happens disproportionately in the early morning hours, which is often exactly when people report waking from their most vivid recurring dreams. One of the most consistent findings in nightmare research is what scientists call cortical hyperarousal, a state where the brain's electrical activity during sleep remains elevated even when the person is not having a nightmare. Studies measuring brain waves in people with frequent nightmares show higher beta and low gamma frequency activity across all sleep stages, not just during the disturbing dream itself. This tells us something important. Recurring nightmare sufferers do not simply have active brains during nightmares. Their brains appear to maintain a kind of elevated vigilance throughout the night, a sleeping watchfulness that suggests the nervous system has not fully accepted that the environment is safe. The nightmare is a symptom of that deeper state. Nightmare disorder, the clinical term for recurring nightmares that cause significant distress or impairment in daily life, is defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders as repeated, extremely dysphoric dreams that are well remembered and create ongoing suffering or dysfunction. Nightmare disorder affects between 2 and 5% of the general adult population. Among people with PTSD, estimates suggest that up to 70% experience frequent nightmares, making them one of the most prevalent and difficult symptoms of that condition. Among psychiatric inpatients, more broadly, recent research found that over 40% experienced nightmares at least once per week, even without a formal PTSD diagnosis. Not all recurring nightmares are trauma-related. Sleep researchers recognize 2 broad categories: trauma-associated nightmares, which directly or thematically reflect a specific disturbing event, and what are called idiopathic nightmares, those that arise without a clear traumatic origin. Idiopathic nightmares typically begin in childhood, may have a moderate genetic component, and tend to feature universal threat themes rather than specific memories. Research shows that children who experienced frequent nightmares are significantly more likely than those who did not to experience psychiatric symptoms in adulthood. The nightmare, even when it seems to have no story behind it, may be a window into something the nervous system learned very early about the world. The most commonly reported recurring nightmare theme worldwide is being chased. It appears so consistently across different languages, different cultures, and different age groups that some researchers now consider it a kind of default fear script, the most ancient simulation the sleeping brain knows how to run. Being pursued by a threat perceived as overwhelming was, for most of human evolutionary history, a genuine danger. The body's survival systems were calibrated to take that experience very seriously. Research suggests that this particular dream may be the nervous system rehearsing a primal emergency, replaying the sensation of danger even when there is nothing physically dangerous nearby. The second most reported recurring nightmare theme is falling. Not drifting, not floating, but the sudden, vertiginous drop. the sense of losing all support beneath you. Many people have experienced the familiar jolt of a hypnic jerk, that sudden muscular contraction as you are falling asleep, sometimes accompanied by the brief image of falling or stumbling. Researchers believe this occurs at the transition between wakefulness and light NREM sleep, when the brain briefly misinterprets the body's natural relaxation, the full falling nightmare. However, particularly when it recurs, seems to carry a different signature, often associated with anxiety, overwhelm, or a felt sense that control has been lost somewhere in waking life. Being unable to move during a nightmare is a third universally reported theme, and it has a direct neurological explanation. During REM sleep, the brainstem sends signals that actively suppress most of your voluntary muscle movement. This is REM atonia, the body's way of preventing you from physically acting out your dreams. Occasionally, the experience of this paralysis bleeds into the dream itself. The dreamer finds themselves running in place, screaming silently, trying to respond to something with arms that will not move. The sensation is real, even if the threat is not. When this experience becomes recurring, it often points to an elevated stress response and a nervous system that has difficulty releasing tension, even across the boundary into sleep. One of the most poetic and counterintuitive findings in nightmare research is what researchers call the threat simulation theory. The idea, developed by Finnish neuroscientist Antti Revonsuo, that nightmares are not a malfunction, they are a feature. This theory proposes that the brain uses the safe simulation space of sleep to rehearse responses to threatening situations, preparing the individual for challenges they might face while awake. In this framework, the recurring nightmare is not the brain failing. It is the brain training. It keeps returning to the same scenario because the rehearsal is not yet complete, because the outcome has not yet been resolved in a way the nervous system accepts as adequate. There is something almost tender in that idea. Your brain keeps practicing because it has not yet given up. Sleep architecture. The pattern and proportion of different sleep stages across a night is measurably altered in people who experience recurring nightmares. Research shows that nightmare sufferers often have shorter periods of slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative stage of NREM, and fragmented REM sleep with more frequent brief awakenings. This fragmentation has real consequences. Slow-wave sleep is when the body repairs and consolidates certain types of learning. REM sleep is when emotional memories are processed. Ideally, given context, when both are disrupted, the nervous system loses some of its most important tools for making sense of what has happened to it. The nightmare both causes and is caused by this fragmentation. A loop the brain struggles to escape on its own. The neurotransmitter norepinephrine, often described as the brain's alerting chemical, normally decreases significantly during REM sleep. This drop appears to be important for the emotional processing that happens during dreaming. Research suggests that during healthy REM sleep, the decrease in norepinephrine allows the brain to revisit emotional memories without triggering the same intense physiological response that occurred when those memories were first formed. In people with recurring nightmares, this decrease is often impaired. The alerting system stays too active. Emotional memories are replayed not in a calm atmosphere of processing, but in the same high activation state in which they were first encoded. The nightmare is not memory being resolved. It is memory being re-experienced. Serotonin also plays a quieting role in the dreaming brain. This neurotransmitter, often associated with mood stability and feelings of safety, is largely suppressed during REM sleep, which is part of why dreams can feel so tonally different from waking life. In nightmare disorder, emerging research points to dysregulation in the serotonergic system as one potential contributor to both nightmare frequency and emotional intensity. Interestingly, certain medications that affect serotonin, including some antidepressants, can increase nightmare frequency as a side effect, suggesting that the relationship between serotonin and dream content is delicate, bidirectional, and not yet fully understood. The sleeping brain's chemistry is precise, and small shifts have large consequences. The stress hormone cortisol follows a natural arc throughout the night, rising gradually toward the morning hours to help prepare the body for waking. But in people who experience chronic stress or difficulty, this cortisol rhythm can become disrupted, rising too early, staying too elevated, or fluctuating unpredictably. Research has consistently linked elevated nighttime cortisol to increased nightmare frequency and intensity. When the stress response cannot fully quiet itself during sleep, the brain's threat detection systems remain engaged, and the dreaming mind finds material for another excursion into fear. The recurring nightmare is often, in this sense, the physical signature of a nervous system that has not yet been convinced it is safe to rest. What you experience during the day genuinely shapes what you dream at night. This is one of the most replicated findings in dream research. So consistent, it has its own name. The day residue effect. Strong emotional experiences from waking life, particularly those that were not fully processed, are significantly more likely to appear in dreams. But the day residue effect works on a delay. Studies have found a peak in dream incorporation around 5 to 7 days after an emotional event, followed by a smaller secondary peak around 1 month later. If a recurring nightmare keeps visiting you, it may be carrying content that arrived in your life weeks, months, or even years ago, unresolved material still waiting patiently for its night. Children experience nightmares at significantly higher rates than adults. Studies suggest that between 10 and 50% of children have nightmares regularly, with peak frequency occurring between ages 3 and 6. A developmental window when the brain is rapidly building its emotional architecture, and when imagination and reality are not yet clearly separated. As children grow older and their prefrontal cortex matures, nightmare frequency typically decreases. Adolescents still experience them at higher rates than adults, and the content tends to shift from fantastical threats toward more socially complex fears. The nightmare evolves with the mind that carries it. Women report recurring nightmares at higher rates than men across most studies, including large population surveys. Researchers have proposed several possible explanations. Women may recall dreams more vividly, on average, may have higher rates of trauma exposure, or may be more likely to notice and report distressing dream content. Some research also suggests hormonal fluctuations, particularly across the menstrual cycle and during pregnancy, can influence both dream recall and nightmare intensity. During pregnancy, recurring nightmares are particularly common, often featuring themes of loss, danger, or being overwhelmed by responsibility. The dreaming brain appears to be especially sensitive to periods of intense emotional and physiological change. The content of recurring nightmares is surprisingly consistent, not just across individuals, but across time. Research comparing nightmare diaries from the 1950s to contemporary reports finds that the major themes, being chased, being trapped, losing teeth, arriving unprepared for an important moment, have remained essentially unchanged. Researchers have suggested this stability points to a set of fundamental fear templates encoded at a level deeper than culture or personal history. The teeth dream, in particular, appears in recorded descriptions of disturbing dreams going back to ancient Rome. Whatever the sleeping brain uses to build its fear scenarios, it draws from a remarkably stable palette. Halfway through our first arc, the picture is becoming clearer. Recurring nightmares are not random. They are the product of specific brain circuits. The amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and the neurotransmitter systems that regulate how emotional memory is processed across sleep. They carry universal themes because they draw on universal fear systems. They repeat because the sleeping brain is trying, again and again, to resolve something that has not yet found resolution. They are more common in people whose nervous systems have learned to stay alert, and in life stages when emotional material is most intense. This is not a malfunction. This is the brain at work, a very tired, very dedicated brain, trying to protect you. Let's pause here and notice your body. As you breathe out slowly, appreciate each tiny cell inside. Trillions of quiet systems working without your instruction. Your heart conducting its patient rhythm. Your lungs filling and releasing. Your brain sorting and filing everything that happened today. Notice the weight of your limbs, the warmth of the places where you rest against something solid. Your body is not afraid right now. It is here. It is safe. It knows what to do next. Now we continue. The relationship between recurring nightmares and PTSD is one of the most studied connections in sleep psychology. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which develops in some people following exposure to deeply unsettling events, lists recurrent distressing dreams among its core diagnostic criteria. Estimates suggest that between 70 and 90% of people with PTSD experience nightmares. But what makes PTSD-related nightmares different from other recurring nightmares is that they often arise not only during REM sleep, but across all sleep stages, including the deep, slow-wave sleep where most people do not dream at all. Researchers have described these as less like dreams and more like sleep-embedded flashbacks. The distressing memory intrudes across every level of sleep, refusing to be contained to its usual stage. The brain's fear extinction system, the neural circuitry that allows learned fear to gradually diminish over time, depends heavily on sleep. During healthy sleep, especially REM sleep, the brain appears to process fear memories in a lower arousal chemical environment, which allows the emotional charge of those memories to reduce without the memory itself being lost. This process is called emotional memory consolidation, and it is one of sleep's most important functions. In people with recurring nightmares, this extinction process appears to be impaired. The brain revisits the fear memory, but the chemical conditions necessary for the charge to diminish are not present. Instead of becoming quieter, the memory stays loud. The nightmare continues not because the brain is failing to remember, but because it is failing to find release. Childhood experiences of fear, abandonment, or chronic stress can shape the brain's nightmare architecture in ways that persist into adulthood. Research on adverse childhood experiences shows that adults who experienced significant emotional difficulty in their early years are meaningfully more likely to develop recurring nightmare patterns. This is not a moral observation. It reflects the way early threat experiences calibrate the amygdala's sensitivity. A nervous system that learned early that the world can be unpredictable will set its nighttime alarm with a lower threshold. Recurring nightmares in adults can sometimes be read as the language of a nervous system that learned long ago to keep watch. Not every recurring nightmare involves terror. Researchers draw a meaningful distinction between nightmares, which cause waking and explicit distress, and what they call dysphoric dreams, disturbing dreams that cause emotional suffering without necessarily jolting the sleeper awake. Dysphoric dreams may involve grief, shame, confusion, or profound sadness. They share the repetitive architecture of nightmares. The same emotional tone returning, the same unresolved scenario. The distinction between a nightmare and a dysphoric dream is sometimes only the question of whether the sleeper surfaces from it. The darkness is the same. It is simply whether you come up for air. Some recurring nightmares arrive in the form of what researchers call scripted replays. Detailed, nearly literal reconstructions of a past event. This is particularly common following severe difficulty. The dreamer re-experiences the event in sleep almost exactly as it occurred in waking life, sometimes including sensory detail, the quality of light, a particular sound, the temperature of a room. These scripted replays are considered by some researchers to be a distinct type of nightmare from the symbolic or fantastical recurring dream. They represent the memory system's most direct attempt at integration, replaying not in metaphor but in the original language of the event. Over time, with appropriate support, even these can soften. The link between recurring nightmares and insomnia is bidirectional and reinforcing. Nightmares disturb sleep. They cause waking, raise heart rate, flood the body with stress hormones, and make it difficult to return to sleep afterward. But insomnia also increases the likelihood of nightmares. When sleep is fragmented or shortened, the body compensates by spending proportionally more time in REM sleep, called REM rebound, which means more time in the stage most associated with intense dreams. Poor sleep creates more nightmares. More nightmares create poorer sleep. This cycle is one reason recurring nightmares can feel so persistent and self-sustaining. A large-scale systematic review published in early 2025 confirmed what smaller studies had been suggesting for years. REM, sleep disturbances, including nightmares, are a transdiagnostic feature, meaning they appear across many different conditions. Not just PTSD, people with depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, and other presentations show elevated rates of REM disruption and nightmare frequency. This suggests that the sleeping mind's struggle to process emotional material is not specific to one diagnosis. It appears wherever the emotional regulation system is under significant strain. The nightmare does not belong to any single category of suffering. It belongs to the experience of a nervous system working very hard. The cerebellum, long thought of as purely a motor coordination structure, the brain's movement manager, has recently been drawn into the picture of nightmare neuroscience. Research, published in 2024, demonstrated direct connections from the cerebellum to the amygdala, suggesting the cerebellum may play a role in the emotional processing of fear. Further, studies have found that the cerebellum is active during REM sleep, and that its connections to the amygdala are implicated in anxiety regulation. Physical activity, which is associated with reduced nightmare frequency in some research, appears to increase the activity of these cerebellar amygdala pathways. The body's movement system may be more involved in your emotional nighttime life than anyone previously understood. The experience of lucid dreaming, becoming aware during a dream that you are dreaming, has drawn significant research attention as it relates to nightmare management. In a lucid dream, the dreamer retains enough prefrontal cortex activity to recognize the dream state, sometimes to alter its content. Studies have found that people who can achieve lucid dreaming show partial reactivation of the prefrontal cortex during sleep, the very region whose quieting contributes to nightmare intensity. Some researchers have explored whether training lucid dreaming skills might help people with recurring nightmares by giving them greater agency within the dream itself. The results are intriguing, but still preliminary. The idea that you could change the story from within is both ancient and scientifically reasonable. Recurrent nightmare themes have been systematically catalogued through large-scale dream research. Beyond being chased and falling, commonly reported recurring nightmares include being trapped in an enclosed space, arriving at an important event completely unprepared, losing teeth, finding no available restroom, showing up somewhere inappropriately, and watching helplessly as something difficult happens to a loved one. Researchers note that nearly all of these themes involve a fundamental loss of control, competence, or safety. The sleeping brain returns to scenarios not of random difficulty, but of specific helplessness. Each theme, in its own way, is a question about whether you can handle what life might bring. The question of why some people develop recurring nightmares after a difficult experience while others do not is one of the most actively researched questions in sleep psychology. Among the factors that appear to increase vulnerability, prior experiences of difficulty, especially in childhood, a family history of nightmare disorder or anxiety, genetic variations affecting the serotonin and norepinephrine systems, and sleep architecture that naturally spends more time in REM. Among the factors associated with resilience, strong social support, access to emotional processing and meaning-making, and consistently good sleep quality before the difficulty occurred. Resilience, in this context, is partly a property of the sleeping brain and what it has been given to work with. Some people experience what researchers call hyperarousal during sleep, a physiological state in which the autonomic nervous system remains elevated in activation even during the deepest sleep stages. This is measured through specific physiological markers: heart rate variability, respiratory patterns, skin conductance, and the frequency spectrum of brainwave activity throughout the night. People with nightmare disorder consistently show signs of elevated nighttime hyperarousal, even on nights when no nightmare is reported. This suggests that the recurring nightmare is not just a product of individual dream events, but an expression of a persistently heightened baseline state. The nervous system not returning to rest, but resting in a slightly watchful position, always half ready for something that has not arrived. Recurring nightmares involving being chased or placed in difficult situations are associated with elevated nighttime heart rate and measurable physical arousal that precede awakening. In sleep laboratory recordings, the heart rate of nightmare sufferers begins to rise in the minutes before they wake, suggesting the body is responding to the emotional content of the dream before the conscious mind surfaces from it. This is one of the more moving findings in nightmare research. The body is already reaching toward protection before you are awake enough to know you need it. The physiology of the nightmare extends further into sleep than the experience itself. The way we talk about nightmares when we are awake appears to affect how they behave when we are asleep. Research on expressive writing, journaling about emotional experiences, including disturbing dreams, has found that writing about recurring nightmares can reduce their frequency and intensity over time. One proposed explanation is that the act of putting a dream into language activates the prefrontal cortex, the very region that is suppressed during the nightmare, giving the emotional memory a new, more regulated representation. The story becomes a thing you have told, not just a thing that keeps happening to you. Language, it seems, is one of the most accessible forms of nightmare intervention we have. We have now traveled through the foundational science of recurring nightmares, the neural circuits, the chemistry, the evolutionary purpose, the common themes, and the factors that make some minds more receptive to their persistence. What is beginning to emerge is a picture not of something broken, but of something trying. The recurring nightmare is not a sign that the brain has failed at sleep. It is a sign that the brain is taking something seriously. It is applying its most powerful simulation tool, the dreaming mind, to material that has not yet been integrated. The question that the second half of our journey will begin to answer is, what does it look like when integration begins? You are still here, still drifting with us through the quiet science of the sleeping mind. Take a slow breath. Feel the weight of your body, grounded and still. We are exploring consciousness itself together, the part of us that reaches even into sleep, still trying to understand, still trying to make sense of what we carry. There is no rush, just the gentle current of curiosity. Let's continue. Imagery, rehearsal therapy, often called IRT, is currently considered the first-line psychological treatment for recurring nightmare disorder, recommended by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. At its core, IRT is elegantly simple. The person writes down a recurring nightmare while awake, then deliberately changes some element of the story, the ending, a character, a detail, to create a new, non-distressing version. They then rehearse this revised dream in their imagination each day before sleep. The brain, it seems, cannot always distinguish between a real dream and a vividly imagined one. By rehearsing the new version repeatedly, the neural pathways associated with the dream are gradually rewritten. Multiple randomized controlled trials have confirmed IRT's effectiveness across diverse populations. People with difficult histories, military veterans, and individuals with nightmare disorder unrelated to any specific event. Studies show that IRT produces significant reductions in nightmare frequency, often within 2 to 3 weeks. These effects are durable, with follow-up assessments at 6 to 12 months showing sustained improvement. What researchers find particularly interesting is that IRT does not require the person to confront the original difficult memory directly. The change happens at the level of the dream narrative itself, the story. not the source. A 2022 study, published in Current Biology, added a fascinating dimension to IRT research by combining the therapy with a technique called targeted memory reactivation during REM sleep. Participants learned a new, peaceful version of their nightmare during IRT sessions, and a specific sound was paired with that positive imagery during the rehearsal. That sound was then played again during REM sleep using a wireless headband that detected sleep stages. Participants who received the REM-timed sound cues showed significantly fewer nightmares and more positive dream emotions after 2 weeks. And the improvement was sustained at 3-month follow-up. The sleeping brain, it appears, can be gently guided toward the new story while it is already dreaming. The therapeutic logic beneath IRT draws on what neuroscientists call memory reconsolidation. When a memory is retrieved, brought back into active awareness, it becomes temporarily malleable, capable of being modified before it is stored again. IRT appears to work, at least in part, by triggering this reconsolidation window for the nightmare memory. By consciously rewriting the dream story while awake and then repeatedly imagining the new version, the person may be modifying the stored template from which the nightmare is generated. The dream is not suppressed. It is rewritten at the level of what the brain considers the authentic record. Beyond IRT, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, often called CBTI, is used in combination with nightmare interventions, particularly when insomnia and nightmares co-occur, which is common. CBTI addresses the beliefs and behaviors that perpetuate sleep disruption, including the anxiety about sleep, the heightened vigilance at bedtime, and the avoidance patterns that form when a person has learned to associate the bedroom with unease. Research suggests that treating insomnia with CBTI can independently reduce nightmare frequency, even when nightmares are not directly targeted. When the nervous system learns that sleep itself is safe, the dreams it produces begin to soften. Lucid dreaming training has been explored as a supplementary approach to nightmare management, with mixed but intriguing results. Some people with recurring nightmares report that the simple awareness of being in a dream, without necessarily changing anything, is enough to reduce the emotional intensity. Others describe using the awareness to transform elements of the dream, turning something threatening into something neutral or even gentle. The challenge is that lucid dreaming is difficult to achieve deliberately and appears to require specific neurological conditions that not everyone can produce consistently. Researchers continue to explore whether it can be trained and whether that training is meaningful for people whose nightmares are persistent. Physical activity is one of the most underappreciated influences on nightmare frequency. Multiple studies have found that regular aerobic activity, walking, cycling, or swimming at moderate intensity, is associated with reduced nightmare distress. In some studies, reduced nightmare frequency. Researchers propose several mechanisms. Activity reduces cortisol and promotes deeper, slow-wave sleep. It appears to increase the activity of the cerebellar amygdala pathway associated with anxiety regulation, and it provides a daily experience of the body moving through challenge and returning to safety. The body, it seems, needs its rehearsals in both directions. The nighttime simulation and the daytime experience of being capable. Certain medications are associated with increased nightmare frequency and intensity. Beta blockers, prescribed for heart conditions and sometimes for anxiety, have long been associated with vivid and disturbing dreams, a side effect related to their interaction with the norepinephrine system during sleep. Some antidepressants, particularly those that affect serotonin reuptake, can produce more vivid dreaming and, in some cases, increase nightmare frequency when first started or when dosage changes. Alcohol, while it suppresses REM sleep in the first half of the night, produces a pronounced REM rebound in the second half, often resulting in vivid, disturbing dreams in the early morning hours. Understanding your own body's relationship with various substances and sleep is part of understanding your nightmares. Prazosin is a medication originally developed for elevated blood pressure that has been studied extensively as a pharmacological approach for nightmare disorder, particularly in people with PTSD. It works by reducing the influence of a specific norepinephrine receptor in the brain, essentially lowering the alerting chemical's access to certain circuits during sleep. Multiple randomized controlled trials found prazosin significantly reduced nightmare frequency and improved sleep quality in veterans with PTSD. However, a large multi-center trial published in 2018 found more mixed results, and the medication is not considered universally effective. The norepinephrine system's role in nightmares is well established. Working with it through medication remains a precise and individual matter. We have now reached the midpoint of our journey. Here is what the science is telling us, gathered quietly like water from 100 separate streams. Recurring nightmares are the product of a brain under emotional pressure, using sleep as a space to process what waking life has not been able to integrate. They repeat because the brain is persistent. They draw on universal fear templates because those templates are ancient and deeply encoded. They can be changed, not by force, not by suppression, but by offering the sleeping mind a new version of the story and giving it enough repetition to replace the old one. This is not a small thing. This is the brain's capacity for revision. The most difficult story can, with patience and the right conditions, become a different one entirely. Memory is not fixed. Every time you recall something, your brain rewrites it slightly before storing it again. The version of any experience your sleeping mind carries tonight is not quite the same as the original. It has been touched by every day that has passed since, and every night of rest adds another gentle edit to the archive. You are not the same person who first had that dream. Your brain is already, quietly, rewriting the story. Nothing needs to be resolved tonight. Just rest, and let the slow work continue. And we continue the journey. The continuity hypothesis of dreaming proposes that dream content reflects waking concerns, emotional preoccupations, and ongoing psychological themes. Under this framework, recurring nightmares are not arbitrary. They are a direct mirror of something that holds the dreamer's attention while awake. Research consistently supports a strong continuity between waking emotional state and dream content. People experiencing high levels of anxiety report more threatening dream content. People going through grief dream frequently of loss. People navigating major life transitions dream of being unprepared, displaced, or uncertain. Your recurring nightmare is not separate from your waking life. It is a compressed, emotionally amplified version of something you are already living with. Dream researchers have identified what they call the rate of dream incorporation, how quickly and completely a significant experience finds its way into dream content. For most emotionally charged events, full incorporation into vivid dream content tends to peak around 5 to 7 days after the event, with a secondary incorporation wave at approximately 1 month. This means the dreams you are having tonight may be processing events from last week or from a month ago, rather than last night. The sleeping brain does not follow the waking calendar. It processes on its own schedule, prioritizing emotional significance over chronological order. Recurring nightmares in childhood are not simply disruptions to be dismissed. Research has found that children who experience frequent nightmares have a statistically higher likelihood of anxiety presentations in adolescence and adulthood. This is not a causal relationship in one direction only. Anxiety also increases nightmare frequency, but the correlation is strong and consistent. When children's nightmares are addressed thoughtfully, with gentle exploration, reassurance, and support rather than dismissal, the trajectory appears to improve. The brain learns whether its nighttime fear is heard. That learning matters for what it does with that fear in the years ahead. The relationship between recurring nightmares and creativity is one of the less discussed but genuinely interesting findings in dream science. Several large surveys of artists, writers, and musicians have found higher than average rates of vivid and recurring dream experience, including nightmare-prone sleep. Some researchers suggest this may reflect a shared underlying trait, a nervous system that generates more intense emotional imagery, both while awake and while asleep. Others propose that the habit of returning to difficult emotional material, including in dreams, may refine the mind's capacity to work with complexity in a generative way. Many writers have described their most persistent nightmares as the source material for their most deeply felt work. The nightmare as creative wellspring, not the failure of sleep, but its most intense offering. The anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in emotional monitoring, error detection, and attention, shows elevated activity in people with frequent nightmares, even during waking rest. This suggests that the nightmare-prone brain is not only different during sleep, but that something in its baseline monitoring of emotional material is persistently heightened. The anterior cingulate cortex acts, in part, like a sensitivity dial for emotional significance. When it is calibrated high, either by temperament or by experience, more things register as worthy of attention, including during sleep. This is not a flaw. In many contexts, heightened emotional sensitivity is exactly what is needed. It is only when the dial will not turn down that it becomes a source of suffering. Research on the people who live alongside those with recurring nightmares has found something quietly significant. The distress of recurrent nightmares extends beyond the individual. Partners and family members of nightmare sufferers report their own sleep disruption from frequent awakenings, their own secondary anxiety about their loved one's suffering, and, in cases of persistent nightmare disorder, a form of secondary emotional fatigue from sustained proximity to distress. Nightmares, in this sense, are not a solitary experience. They ripple outward, and the support of those nearby, the quiet reassurance of a voice in the dark after a difficult dream, appears consistently in research as one of the factors that helps regulate the nervous system's return to calm. Some people develop what researchers call anticipatory anxiety around sleep, a state in which the approach of bedtime itself becomes a source of unease because it signals the expected arrival of nightmares. This pre-sleep anxiety has measurable physiological effects. It raises cortisol, increases heart rate, delays the onset of sleep, and creates the very heightened state that makes nightmares more likely. The nervous system becomes caught in a loop. Nightmare creates fear of sleep. Fear of sleep creates physiological elevation. Elevation creates nightmare. Breaking this loop is often a central focus of treatment, not by addressing the nightmare directly, but by making the approach to sleep feel safer. After waking from an intense recurring nightmare, the body is in a state of significant activation. Heart rate is elevated, cortisol is rising, and the amygdala is fully engaged. Returning to sleep from this state is physiologically difficult. Research has found that nightmare sufferers often spend extended periods awake after nightmares, sometimes 30 minutes to over an hour, unable to settle the nervous system enough to re-enter sleep. The strategies most effective for navigating this period include slow diaphragmatic breathing, gentle grounding techniques, and deliberate engagement of the senses. Attention to what is cool, warm, soft, or simply present in the immediate environment. These redirect the nervous system's attention from the internal alarm to the actual, safe surroundings. The narrative coherence of a recurring nightmare, how fully formed and story-like it feels, may carry meaningful information about how to work with it. More narratively structured dreams tend to involve deeper engagement of the memory and language systems, which is precisely why therapeutic approaches that treat the nightmare as a story worth changing may be especially effective. IRT works, in part because it meets the nightmare in its own form, a story. It offers the story a different ending, and the brain, which built the narrative in the first place, is capable of accepting the revision when it is offered with enough repetition and enough calm. The nightmare is not a symptom to be suppressed. It is a story waiting to be rewritten. The research on gender and recurring nightmares reveals not just a difference in frequency, with women reporting higher rates, but a meaningful difference in content. Women's recurring nightmares more commonly involve interpersonal difficulty, harm to loved ones, and relational loss. Men's recurring nightmares more commonly involve direct physical challenge, pursuit, and confrontation. Researchers suggest this may reflect both cultural differences in how fear is shaped throughout life and genuine differences in the experiences each group has had to navigate most carefully. The nightmare draws its imagery from the library of actual experience. It chooses its material from the fears that have mattered most. One of the more tender findings in nightmare research concerns people who have experienced grief. Studies examining bereaved individuals' dream content consistently find that the deceased appear frequently in dreams, sometimes in nightmares, sometimes in what researchers call visitation dreams that feel profoundly comforting rather than frightening. Nightmares following loss tend to involve helplessness in the face of that loss, or scenarios in which the loved one is in difficulty and cannot be reached. Over time, with processing and support, the nature of these dreams often shifts. The difficult version of the lost person gradually gives way to a gentler presence. The nightmare transforms, not by forgetting, but by healing. Some recurring nightmares involve what researchers call impossible spatial logic, environments that shift and contradict themselves, doors that open to wrong rooms, familiar places that have become unrecognizable. This spatial distortion is a reliable feature of REM dream construction. During dreaming, The brain's spatial navigation system, centered in the hippocampus and surrounding regions, operates differently than it does while awake. Place cells and grid cells, which normally map the environment with precision, generate approximate and metaphorical representations during dreaming. The familiar house in the nightmare is not your actual house. It is the brain's emotional symbol for home, safety, and belonging, rendered in the softer language of the sleeping mind. The experience of sleep paralysis, waking briefly, with the body still, in REM atonia, unable to move, is associated with recurring nightmares in a significant proportion of sufferers. Sleep paralysis can be accompanied by intensely vivid and unsettling perceptions, a sense of presence in the room, sounds that feel real, a feeling of pressure on the chest. Across cultures, this experience has been explained through the lens of local traditions. Figures in the doorway, presences sitting at the edge of the bed. The medical explanation is neurological. The dreaming and waking states are briefly overlapping. The brain is semi-awake, but the body's muscle suppression from REM has not yet lifted. The figure is not there. It is REM atonia still finishing its work. Emerging research using data from 3 large US cohort studies has found an association between frequent distressing dreams and markers of accelerated biological aging over long follow-up periods. This work, presented at sleep medicine conferences in 2025, is still building toward peer-reviewed publication. But the pattern it suggests is consistent with what the broader sleep science literature has long indicated. The sleep system's struggle to process emotional material has biological consequences that extend well beyond the night itself. Separate findings from the UK Dementia Research Institute have also found associations between distressing dream frequency and changes in cognitive function over time. These are areas of active and evolving research, worth holding gently. We are now deep enough into our journey that the shape of the full answer is visible. Recurring nightmares are not simply difficult dreams. They are the brain's persistent attempt to do something meaningful with material it cannot resolve on its own. They arise in the intersection of emotional memory, the amygdala's patient alerting, the prefrontal cortex's quieting, and the chemical environment of REM sleep. They follow universal patterns because human fears are, at a deep level, universal. They can change through narrative rewriting, through emotional processing, through sleep improvement, through the patient quieting of a watchful nervous system. The nightmare is not the enemy. It is the message. And messages, once received, do not need to keep repeating. The phenomenon of sequential dreaming, where the same narrative continues across multiple nights in what feels like a serial story, has been described in both historical accounts and modern dream journals. Some recurring nightmares have this quality, not exactly the same each time, but clearly episodes in a continuing story. Researchers suggest this may reflect a sustained engagement by the memory consolidation system, with material too complex or emotionally layered to resolve in a single night. The brain, in other words, is working on a long project. Each nightly visit is another session of the same quiet work. The thalamus serves as a relay station for sensory information, filtering what reaches conscious awareness both while awake and, in a modified form, during sleep. During NREM sleep, the thalamus gates sensory input almost completely, creating the relative quiet of deep sleep. During REM, this gating changes. Sensory-like signals generated internally by the dreaming brain pass through the thalamus and are treated by the rest of the brain as genuinely experienced. The thalamus, in this sense, is the gatekeeper whose cooperation makes the dream world feel real. When the recurring nightmare arrives, it comes through the same door as waking reality. There is something called extinction recall, the brain's ability to retrieve not just a fear memory, but the safety memory that was learned afterward. In healthy emotional processing, after a difficult experience, the brain builds a new memory. The situation did not cause permanent harm. You endured. That safety learning is stored and, ideally, becomes more accessible over time than the original fear. In people with recurring nightmares, extinction recall is often impaired. The safety memory is less accessible, particularly during sleep. Researchers believe this is partly because extinction memories require the prefrontal cortex for retrieval, and the prefrontal cortex is quieted during REM. The nightmare is, in part, the fear memory without its counterweight. Physical sensations during nightmares are real sensations. While the content of a nightmare is internally generated, the racing heart, the sweating, the muscle tension, the fast breathing, these are genuine physiological responses. The body does not distinguish, at the level of the autonomic nervous system, between a dream situation and a real one. This is why waking from a nightmare does not immediately feel like waking from a fiction. The body has been genuinely activated. The stress hormones are genuinely elevated. The return to calm is a physiological process, not just a cognitive one. The heart needs time to slow. The breath needs time to steady. That time is not weakness. It is the body completing something real. Mindfulness-based practices have been studied in the context of nightmare frequency, with encouraging preliminary results. Regular mindfulness meditation appears to reduce nighttime hyperarousal, lower baseline anxiety, and improve overall sleep architecture in consistent practitioners. Several studies have found that mindfulness training reduces nightmare frequency over time, particularly in people with elevated stress. The proposed mechanism connects back to the prefrontal cortex. Regular mindfulness practice strengthens the connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, building a more regulated emotional response system. What is practiced while awake changes the architecture of the sleeping brain. Attention, it turns out, is a form of long-term neurological change. The experience of recognizing a recurring nightmare from within the dream, a background knowledge that you have been here before, that this has happened before, is more common than most people realize. Researchers have suggested this partial awareness is a kind of embryonic lucidity, the beginnings of the prefrontal cortex reasserting itself, even within the dream. Over time, this recognition can become more complete, more conscious, and more useful, the mind learning to see its own theater from both sides of the curtain. And that seeing, even incomplete, is its own quiet form of progress. Creative and expressive therapies, art, music, movement, have been incorporated into nightmare disorder treatment programs alongside IRT and CBTI, particularly in recovery settings. The common thread is the use of channels beyond language alone to access and process emotional material that words may not fully reach. Research on narrative approaches to nightmare treatment suggests that the more fully a person can create a new representation of the nightmare, not just write it, but draw it, speak it, move through it, the more comprehensively the emotional template appears to shift. The nightmare exists at a level deeper than words. Meeting it in that register may be the most complete way to offer it something new. The capacity to manage emotional experience without being overwhelmed, what researchers call affect regulation, is central to understanding why recurring nightmares persist in some people and resolve in others. People with well-developed affect regulation show greater prefrontal amygdala connectivity, a more flexible response to activation, and a faster physiological recovery from arousal. These same characteristics are associated with less frequent nightmares and faster resolution of nightmare patterns. Affect regulation is not a fixed trait. It develops throughout life, is shaped by relationships and experience, and can be strengthened through consistent sleep, physical health, and the gradual accumulation of experiences of successfully moving through difficult emotions. The process of therapeutic change in nightmare treatment is often described by people who have undergone IRT as happening in stages. First, the nightmare continues, but the distress upon waking gradually lessens. Then, the content begins to shift, usually in small ways at first, the pursuing figure becoming less distinct, the situation softening at the edges. Then, gaps begin to appear between occurrences. 2 nights without the dream, then 4, then a week. Finally, for many people, the nightmare does not disappear entirely so much as lose its power. It may still occasionally visit, but it no longer commands the same fear. It has become, in some quiet way, a known thing, and known things are rarely as overwhelming as unknown ones. Here, at the 3/4 point of our journey, the full answer is in view. Recurring nightmares are the brain's language for something unresolved. They arrive in REM sleep because that is where emotional memory is processed. They repeat because the emotional charge has not yet decreased. They carry universal themes because human fear is, at its foundation, universal, and they can be changed. What the science is pointing toward, with increasing clarity, is this: the brain that generates recurring nightmares is a brain that is working harder than it should have to, in conditions that may not have been its choice, but working, still trying, still reaching for resolution. That brain deserves the same gentleness you would offer anyone who has been trying for a very long time. You might be feeling very tired now. That is perfectly right. Notice the breath. Notice how, without any instruction, it has been slowing. Sleep does not come when you pursue it. It comes when you stop needing to. Think about what happens every night, in every brain, in every human being alive. The slow letting go, the body settling, the conscious mind releasing its grip on the day. This is not something you do. It is something that happens to you when you allow it. Your brain has been working all evening. It knows the way to rest. You don't have to lead it there. We're almost there now. The sleeping brain is not resting. Even in the deepest stages of sleep, billions of neurons remain active, processing, sorting, filing, consolidating. What changes during sleep is not the quantity of brain activity, but its quality, the conscious, evaluating, Planning mind steps back. Deeper systems. Memory. Emotion. The slow chemistry of repair. Move forward. Sleep is not absence. It is the brain working in its other mode. Dreams about falling are among the oldest recorded human experiences. They appear in accounts from ancient China, medieval Europe, and oral traditions across North America. Every culture that has ever told stories has included the falling dream. Something in the architecture of the human nervous system is structured to produce it. You are not alone in this. Every person who has ever had that dream was briefly part of a very long human story. REM. Sleep is sometimes called paradoxical sleep, because while the body is more still during REM than during any other stage, the brain is more active. The breath becomes irregular. The eyes move behind closed lids. The dreaming begins. This paradox is not an accident. The stillness protects the dreamer from acting out the vivid scenarios the mind is constructing. The activity processes what the stillness has made space for. Movement and rest. Quiet and work. Both held at once. And in that holding, the mind does what waking life rarely allows. The most common transformation people report in recurring nightmares, when they finally begin to change, is not that the difficulty disappears. It is that the dreamer finds, for the first time, that they can move. The legs that would not carry them now do. The voice that was silent now speaks. The dreamer who was helpless becomes capable of response. The shift in the nightmare often mirrors a shift in waking life. A sense, however small, that something previously immovable has begun to yield. The word nightmare comes from the Old English word mare, a creature of folklore believed to press down on sleeping people, making them unable to breathe or move. The sensation that inspired this belief was almost certainly sleep paralysis. Every culture that left written records has a version of this figure. In Nordic mythology, it was the Mara. In German tradition, the Nachtmar. In Malay folklore, the Hantu Tidur. The experience has always found expression, always been named, always been given a shape. Something about naming the fear makes it slightly less overwhelming. Research on nightmare frequency across the lifespan has found something quietly hopeful. Nightmares tend to decrease in frequency from middle age onward. This appears to correspond with broader changes in emotional processing. Older adults show, in general, a more regulated response to difficulty and a greater ability to find meaning in complex experiences. The aging brain is, in some ways, becoming better at the work that nightmares need, resolving fear with perspective. This is not guaranteed for everyone, but it is a pattern, quietly present across the data. The relationship between recurring nightmares and creative work has a particular expression in the history of literature. Robert Louis Stevenson described Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as originating in a dream. Mary Shelley reportedly dreamed the foundational image of Frankenstein. Edgar Allan Poe described his most unsettling writing as emerging from the territory between sleep and waking. These are not coincidences. The dreaming mind has access to emotional material that the waking, editing, self-conscious mind often keeps at a careful distance. The nightmare does not edit. It shows things whole. The body's overnight repair processes, immune function, cellular maintenance, hormonal regulation, depend on the full arc of sleep, including its deepest stages. when the nervous system is repeatedly activated during the night, these restorative processes are interrupted. Over time, consistently disrupted sleep is associated with elevated inflammatory markers and changes in immune function. The body needs the full night to do its repair work. When that arc is broken repeatedly, the repair is incomplete. Your sleep is not merely about your mind, it is about every cell. Some people with recurring nightmares describe a moment, unpredictable, not sought, when a nightmare they have had for years simply does not come. The night passes without the familiar darkness. Then the next night, then the next. The absence is, at first, startling, almost as though they had been waiting for it. Then, gradually, the waiting softens. The night begins to feel like different territory than it once did. The brain, working in its slow and patient way, had at last arrived somewhere new. Sleep researchers have begun exploring the possibility that certain patterns of distressing dream content might serve as early indicators of changes in broader health. Distressing dream frequency has been associated, in some cohort studies, with changes in cognitive function over years of follow-up. This is an area of active and early-stage research, not yet translated into clinical guidance, but it points toward a future in which the content of our dreams is understood not just as psychological information, but as a potential signal about overall well-being. The sleeping mind may be monitoring more than we have yet learned to hear. Recurring nightmares in people who have never experienced a specific difficult event, the so-called idiopathic nightmares, are more common than once thought. Research suggests they begin more often than not in childhood, may have a moderate genetic component, and show continuity across the lifespan. One large population study found that people who reported frequent childhood nightmares were substantially more likely to experience significant psychological distress in adulthood. The nightmare-prone brain may have characteristics: heightened emotional sensitivity, elevated monitoring, that predate any single experience. The research on nightmares in children provides some of the most reassuring data in the field. The overwhelming majority of children with frequent nightmares, even those that appear persistent, do not carry nightmare disorder into adulthood when their nightmares are met with warmth, calm parental response, and an environment that treats their fears as valid. The single most protective factor identified in research is not a specific technique. It is the experience of having the nightmare met with a steady, safe presence. The fear, acknowledged and not escalated, loses some of its power. The child learns, over time, that the night is manageable. That learning becomes part of who they are. There is a kind of recurring dream that is not a nightmare. The return dream. Many people report dreaming repeatedly of a childhood home, a school they attended long ago, a place that no longer exists as they knew it. These dreams often carry a tone of wistfulness rather than fear, a quality of searching for something that cannot quite be located. Researchers have noted that return dreams increase during times of significant life transition, moving, changing relationships, the passages of age. The sleeping mind goes back to origin points when the present feels uncertain. It is looking for something solid to rest on. Research suggests that sleep in the hours immediately following a distressing experience plays a particularly important role in how the emotional charge of that experience is processed. People who sleep well in the first day or two following acute difficulty show lower rates of subsequent nightmare development over time. This has led some researchers to propose that protecting sleep in the immediate aftermath of hardship may be a meaningful early support. The night after is not passive. It is active, important, and quietly formative. Some people report that their most persistent recurring nightmares end not gradually, but at a specific moment, and that the ending corresponds with a waking recognition, sometimes in therapy, sometimes in quiet reflection. They arrive at an understanding of what the dream has been carrying, and after that, it does not return with the same intensity. Researchers call this insight-mediated resolution, the idea that the nightmare's function is completed when its message is consciously received. The pattern appears often enough in clinical accounts to be taken seriously. Sometimes the nightmare softens, not because it is treated, but because it is heard. The way the brain generates recurring nightmares is, in its own way, a form of care. The amygdala does not raise its signal because it wants you to suffer. It raises it because, at some level, it believes you need to be prepared. The hippocampus does not keep replaying the memory because it enjoys the replay. It replays because it has not yet filed that material somewhere that feels fully safe. Every structure involved in the nightmare is doing its job. The suffering is a side effect of functions that, in gentler circumstances, work entirely in your favor. Researchers studying recurring nightmares across long periods of time have found something worth resting on. Most nightmares, even the most persistent, eventually change. They shift in content, decrease in frequency, lose intensity. Many resolve entirely over months or years, sometimes with support, sometimes simply with the passage of time and the accumulation of new experiences. The brain's extraordinary plasticity, its capacity to rewire, to build new associations, to revise what it has learned, applies to the dreaming mind as much as the waking one. The nightmare that has visited you for years is not necessarily permanent. Gentle attention to the emotional quality of the pre-sleep hour has been associated with reduced nightmare frequency in preliminary research. When the last hour before sleep is spent in calm rather than in review of the day's most difficult moments, the dreaming mind appears to find less distressing material to work with. This is not a guaranteed intervention, and the research is not yet robust, but it is a gentle, accessible practice, and it aligns with what the broader science suggests about the relationship between pre-sleep emotional state and what arrives in the night. The neuroscience of recurring nightmares is still young. Much of what is known has been established only in the last 2 decades. As neuroimaging technology has become precise enough to observe the dreaming brain from outside, there are still more open questions than settled answers. Why do some recurring nightmare themes persist for 30 years, while others resolve in weeks? What determines whether difficulty leads to recurring nightmares or not? Why do the same themes appear across cultures with no contact with each other? The sleeping mind is one of the last great interior territories of science. The map is incomplete, but what has been discovered is already enough to be certain of this. Your recurring nightmare has a reason. It is not random. It is not punishment. It is meaning, compressed, vivid, and still waiting to be understood. To those who have carried a recurring nightmare for years, who have woken in the dark with the familiar feeling of dread, who have felt the private weight of it as they moved through the day, who have wondered whether it would ever change. The science offers something worth sitting with, not a cure, not a guarantee, but a reframing. Your dreaming brain has been doing very difficult work, in conditions that were not always fair, with tools that were not always adequate, on material that was genuinely hard to carry, and it has not given up. It keeps returning because it is still trying to find the way through. That persistence is not pathology. It is, in its own way, a kind of loyalty to your own life. The most important single finding in the research on recurring nightmare resolution may be this: the quality of felt safety in waking life is one of the strongest predictors of nightmare frequency and of recovery. Safety, relational, physical, psychological, changes what the sleeping brain has to monitor. When the waking environment is genuinely gentler, the nighttime surveillance system can gradually, incrementally reduce its vigilance. The nightmare does not require the removal of all difficulty from life. It requires, over time, enough evidence that the world is navigable, that relationships are survivable, that the self can endure. That evidence accumulates slowly, but it accumulates. Research on post-nightmare morning mood found that the emotional aftermath of a difficult dream can linger for hours after waking, coloring how the day begins, shaping early interactions, affecting concentration and energy. Researchers have found that brief morning reflection on the dream, gentle physical movement, and deliberate engagement with the senses of the actual environment, the warmth of light, the texture of something near, all appear to help accelerate the return to baseline. The morning after is its own small terrain. It too can be navigated with care. The function of nightmares, why the dreaming mind generates these scenarios rather than simply resting, remains one of sleep science's most genuinely open questions. The threat simulation theory says rehearsal. The emotional regulation theory says processing. The memory consolidation theory says integration. Each captures something real. The honest answer may be that nightmares serve more than one function simultaneously, that they are the place where rehearsal, processing, and integration all converge. In the particular and imprecise language of the dreaming mind, they are not elegant, but they may be, in some sense, necessary. The recurring nightmare, when it finally ends, often leaves something behind, not a scar, more like a memory of difficult weather. Some people describe a changed relationship to fear after their nightmare resolved, a greater capacity to recognize and name difficult emotions without being dominated by them. The work the sleeping brain was doing, however unwelcome, was also, in its way, teaching. The lessons were not clean or chosen, but they were real. And the mind that carried those nightmares is, in ways that are difficult to fully see, different from the mind that might never have had them. Here, at the end of our 100 facts, the answer that was forming from the very beginning has fully arrived. The science of recurring nightmares is, ultimately, a science of a brain that refuses to abandon you, that keeps returning to difficult material not because it has forgotten the difficulty, but because it has not yet found the way through. The nightmare is not evidence of damage. It is evidence of persistence. The same tenacity that drives the recurring dream is the tenacity that, given the right conditions, eventually finds resolution. Your sleeping mind is not broken. It is working, in the dark, in the strange language of symbols and feeling, towards something that feels, from the outside, like rest and rest, in the end, is exactly where this has always been going. And so, our quiet journey through the science of recurring nightmares comes to a gentle close. We began where the nightmare begins, in the amygdala, that small structure raising its patient signal, and in the REM stage, where the most vivid simulations are assembled from memory and emotion. We learn that the brain does not generate these dreams carelessly, that every repetition is a form of effort, an attempt to process something that has not yet found its resolution. We met imagery, rehearsal therapy, and the quiet elegance of offering the brain a new version of the story. We visited the threat simulation, the ancient idea that the sleeping mind rehearses difficulty the way a muscle rehearses movement, building capacity for challenges not yet faced. We learned that even the most persistent nightmare carries, within it, the possibility of change. The fact that you are still here, at the end of 100 quiet facts, tells its own gentle story. The recurring nightmare reminds us that the sleeping mind is not a passive thing. It works. It reaches. It carries what the waking world cannot always hold. Much of this deepest processing happens in silence, in the dark, in the early morning hours, in the last long arc of REM before the day begins. The dreaming mind reveals a kind of tireless loyalty to the experiences that shaped us, to the fears that were real, to the possibility that even what has repeated for years can, one night, arrive somewhere new, without the willingness of the sleeping brain to keep returning. Some of the most important emotional work of a human life would never get done at all. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about unity, of every memory the sleeping brain holds, every feeling it has ever carried, every night it has spent in the difficult work of trying to carry what the waking mind could not. You are not separate from that work. You are the person it is being done for. Think about the fact that somewhere tonight, in every country, in countless quiet rooms, other people are also dreaming. Some of them are working through the same corridors you have walked in your recurring dreams. Some of them have already found the way out. Some are still finding it. You are part of that quiet, universal human effort. Let your entire being dissolve into the knowledge that the work continues even as you rest, that every breath you take now is part of the process, that you do not have to hold anything tonight. Prepare for deep sleep, no boundaries left, only peace. If this gentle journey through the science of your own sleeping mind brought you any ease tonight, any sense that what you have been carrying has a reason, and that reason points toward healing, perhaps pass it softly along to someone else who wakes afraid in the dark. A quiet share, a gentle like, a simple subscribe. It might be exactly what another tired mind needs to find its way here. One peaceful night, one sleepy soul at a time. The work of the dreaming mind is still unfolding right now, without your effort, without your witness. You don't need to hold any of this. It was never yours to carry alone. Tonight you traveled inward, through corridors most people never paused to notice. You touched the architecture of the sleeping mind and found it, against all expectation, working in your favor. You can allow these thoughts of nightmares and healing to fade now, like a difficult dream at dawn, not gone, simply becoming something else, leaving only the quiet, unheld calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if all you have been carrying is being sorted by careful, invisible hands, and is simply setting itself down. If sleep comes, let it carry you the way resolution does, not with force, but with quiet intention, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, the dreaming mind will still be there, still tending, still weaving, still becoming. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, gentle explorer. And remember, the brain that kept returning to the difficult place was always trying to find its way home. Good night.